Now, introducing Michael Day. As you can see, the picture resembles the reality here. We can see Michael as well. Michael is the author of a very interesting and important trilogy about the Shrine of the Bab that had been published by George Ronald, the publisher in England. The first volume is called Journey to a Mountain, which covers the period 1850 to 1921 and covers the movement of the remains of the Bab, primarily from the martyrdom up to the interment in the shrine. Second volume, Coronation on Carmel, appeared in 2018, and the final volume, Sacred Stairway, appeared this year. Michael was the editor of the Bahá'í World News Service in Haifa from 2003 to 2006. Before that, he was a journalist for various newspapers in New Zealand and Australia, the last one being the Western Australian newspaper based in Perth, where he specialized in reporting from Indonesia. He resides in Queensland, Australia, where it is a lovely, warm day today, unlike our weather in North America, where his wife, Dr. Chris Day, also lives. She's the author of 52 Secrets of Psychology, and they have two sons, Tom and George. I cut out the part about their dogs. So I can mention that if he wishes, of course. I will stop sharing my screen. We will then turn to Michael and his presentation. And Michael, very much a warm welcome from cold North America. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your presentation this evening.
Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome, Robert. I know it's cold there. It's very warm here. And a very warm welcome to everybody who is listening and viewing at this moment. It's a privilege to be able to address everybody on this topic, and especially in light of the previous speakers, some of whom were colleagues of mine at the Bahá'í World Centre, Baharab Ma'ani, Stephen Phelps and Siamak. And in this year of the bicentenary of the birth of the Bab, it is also quite fitting, I think, to focus on the Shrine of the Bab, which I guess is one of the most, well, it's really the physical evidence presence that we can point to when we're talking about the Bab to those in the wider community who want to know more about that sacred figure. The importance of the shrine, of course, is based from the very beginning by the fact that Baha'u'llah himself was the founder of the shrine. There was reference to his Mount Carmel in 1868 when he first viewed that mountain, and of course in 1891 when he directed Abdul-Baha to bring the sacred remains from Persia and to inter them in a shrine to be built on the site that he indicated. And of course the master himself considered that of his three major achievements of his mission, one was taking the faith to the west, the other was building a temple in Ishkabad, and of course the other one was building the shrine of the Bab, and according to the instructions of Baha'u'llah himself. And this was one of the few tasks that Baha'u'llah directly, it seems, gave to him to do. So that shows some of the level of the importance, which is far more, I'm sure, important than we can ever understand. From The Guardian, we know how important he viewed it by the fact that when the hands of the cause arrived to assist him in the building of the superstructure, he was firm in his advice to them to visit the shrine as soon as possible after their arrival. And he, like the master, spent as much time as possible. He visited the shrine every day when he was in Haifa. The master spent all the time he could possibly be at the shrine in the time that up till his passing. And the Universal House of Justice, of course, through their messages and through their through the building of the terraces and the restoration, show their commitment to the sacredness of this shrine. Now, the topic of the talk is some of the findings that are included in the trilogy that I've written, And the first book is Journey to a Mountain, and that covers, as Robert was saying earlier, the transfer, first of all, the transfer of the sacred remains of the Bab from Tabriz to Tehran, the concealment of those remains for nearly 50 years in Persia, and then the transfer of them to the Holy Land, the interment in the shrine that the master built, and of course it leads up to his own passing and his funeral. So in the investigation of the historical facts, there were many sources, and you can see them in the bibliography of the book. There's quite an extensive bibliography, and I would urge everybody who consults the book to also read the notes, because I've written it as a narrative, and it does have a lot of information in the narrative. But of course, there's always more information than a narrative can handle, and so a lot of the important information is in the notes as well as in the text. And I'm just looking at it today and reminding myself particularly of one particular chapter, which I'll get onto shortly, but just to let you know about some of the findings. The first was how the sacred remains were transferred from Tabriz to Tehran. They were taken on horseback after they had been rescued after his martyrdom. And one of the amazing things about getting them from Tabriz to Tehran was how they eluded the customs posts that were placed on the path that led from between those two cities. And one of the ways that, and the way they did that was one of the members of the group escorting the coffin was a deputy director of the customs of Tabriz, who happened to be a Baha'i. So he knew how to get through those checkpoints and to get the sacred remains to Tehran, where Baha'u'llah had directed them to come. Now, I had been interested in this whole story for a whole range of reasons. One, of course, is the feeling that you get when you're at the shrine, or what I experienced myself. But the others were my curiosity about what Shoghi Effendi had mentioned in God Passes By, about the drama associated with the concealment of the coffin containing the sacred remains of the Bab. And so I investigated that from various sources, and you can read about that in Journey to a Mountain. But some of the drama of moving the coffin from one place to another is quite astounding, and quite when I was writing about it and researching it, it did feel, you get the feeling of such a sacred process of these are the remains of a manifestation of God, and how important it was that they were preserved and kept for humanity. The drama of how they were hidden is something that I think it's probably best for you to read rather than for me to explain. I think one of the breakthroughs was finding out how the sacred remains were transferred from Persia to the Holy Land, and that was quite a struggle, because it was a matter of great secrecy and security about this process. But through tablets of Baha'u'llah and through various books and articles, and with the help of Mr. Nachavani, and also particularly Mr. Fuad Izzeddiniya, who was my research associate, and through Persian documents, we found out, and I used that information to track the direction. Let me just show you first. Of course, this is what we're talking about, the shrine as it appears today. But this is one of the places in Persia that the sacred remains were concealed, in the grounds of the shrine. And we're talking about, or we were talking about the shrine that eventually Abdul-Baha built. But this is the map here. So you can see originally from Tabriz down to Tehran, with a overnight stop in Zanjan. But then when the master gave the command for a group to bring the sacred remains to the Holy Land, they first of all went down through Qum, Kashan, Natanz. You can see it right down there to Isfahan. And of course the question came, why didn't they just go straight across from Tehran to Baghdad? And the reason is quite clear in that Isfahan, the vizier of Isfahan, that's a top public official, he was a Baha'i, and he was able to not only store the sacred remains in his house, but also to issue a document that was really a passport that could be shown to the border guards between Persia and the Ottoman Empire, which is the Iraq, so that the people who were carrying the remains would not be searched, and neither would their luggage. Now, the question of how the sacred remains were carried came through a tablet revealed by Abdul-Baha, who mentioned and instructed that they be carried with all due reverence in a running throne. Now, a running throne is something similar to how the Jewish people carried the Ark of the Covenant in a palanquin with men at the front and men at the back carrying it. And this is how the sacred remains of the Bab were carried from Persia, or in Persia, and then to the Holy Land. And I would urge everybody who's interested in this topic particularly to read chapter 8 of the book, page 29 of the book, in which Abdul-Baha is quoted with reference to the Ark of the Covenant, to the various references to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which show the oneness of religion and the sacredness of this process. So the men carried these sacred remains on this running throne, men walking in the front, walking at the back, and the coffin in a container in the middle on a platform. It was quite common to carry sacred objects this way. So when you're going in a caravan across, then people would understand that it was something important, but nobody knew what was actually in the luggage there that they were carrying, or in the running throne. So they went over the mountains and to Baghdad, and then crossed the desert from Baghdad to Damascus and to Beirut. With the help of the Bahá'í World Centre, I received information about how the remains, or the coffin, was not only stored in Beirut but taken by boat to Akka in the Holy Land. That is a drama all in itself, because there were people who were seeking to purloin the coffin, either because they thought it might contain riches or treasure, but also others who were opponents of the faith. But anyway, the story goes, the narrative tells how it arrived in the Holy Land, and then goes into the story about how the master built the shrine itself is something quite remarkable, because he had to explain how a building of such size was built on Mount Carmel, which was a long way from where he was living, and also away from the settlement of Haifa itself. It's up on the hill, and how he built it. And one of the most remarkable things was that after the foundations were built and he had laid the foundation stone, the situation for him was that he became once again a prisoner back. So during the construction, his instructions had to be passed without him actually viewing the construction process, which is quite remarkable. Now, he also organised, as you know, a sarcophagus, which also has sacred symbolism, from Burma. And here we are. Here's the photograph of it in Burma, now called Myanmar. And you can see the date, if you look carefully at the top there, 98. You can see the year date. So that was transferred by ship. The stone that Abdul-Baha used for the facing of the shrine was this warm limestone that we can even we can see today and even put our hands on. It's very pleasant to the feel. It's rough texture, and this is the building that Abdu'l-Baha built. And as you can see, it's quite solid. It's a mausoleum. It's a sober structure, and it's built really in the tradition of German Templar architecture on the outside. You can even see buildings that have somewhat similar features today, but the interior, of course, was quite different. And there's a wonderful picture of Abdu'l-Baha that I obtained at with the great help of the staff of the US Baha'i Archives, to whom I am very grateful, Roger and Lewis and colleagues. Now, this is one thing that I figure out was a house between the right next to the shrine, and this was the house of Abbas Cooley, who was the caretaker of the shrine. And you can see a picture here of the master looking at the shrine that he loved so much. He's actually at the back of the house. The house was looking uphill. The front door of the house was actually looking up Mount Carmel. The master here is on the back on a balcony looking at the shrine. But it took me, like all research projects, I suppose, once you know what's happened, it seems obvious, but when you don't know, it's a struggle to find out what were they talking about. Well, there was a house there. It's no longer there. It was demolished in the 1930s. This is the process of the construction, a photograph taken by Edward Getzinger, and you can see the rudimentary terraces below. You can see the stonework at the top, and the book describes how the stonemasons built that great structure. Now, as I was saying before, the dramatic part of the story is that Baha'is know is the interment of the sacred remains of the Bab in 1909, but there are many more details that we found through Baha'i documents, tablets, and other descriptions that really put the whole interment into a wider historical perspective. And there were a lot of farmers attending to it, as you can imagine. A description of how Abdu'l-Baha came across in his wagon across from Akka along the beach, stopped at checkpoint, which is still there today, and then moved to attend the shrine where the ceremony took place. And who was there and what happened there is something that I found fascinating to research and find. The details. There are a number of Western pilgrims from both the United States and Canada, and also others from other parts of the world, as well as Shoghi Effendi himself and of course the master. Very dramatic evening. The stories about what happened after the shrine, after the interment, and then particularly after the First World War, when Abdu'l-Baha spoke of his vision for the shrine, which have now come to fruition, that was amazing to read, especially in light of what we see today. And then the struggle was then to find the description of the funeral in more detail about which particular route they took to get to the shrine. You can see a photograph now of the end point of the funeral procession, but it wasn't quite clear in any written documents about where exactly did they turn. Well, this photograph shows really that they turned right down up from which is now Hatzianut Avenue, the big road behind the shrine. They turned right into the towards the Pilgrim House, and then couldn't find out. We had a big discussion about whether they went to the shrine via the way we go now from the Pilgrim House to the shrine, or another way. And it was one morning that I was just in that sleepy hour at 4 o'clock in the morning, and something came into my mind that I have an aerial photograph. I ran down, looked at my computer, expanded it, and found the path. Sure enough, it was not the way that we go now, but in front of the house of Abbas Cooley, which was the house next to the shrine. In fact, in this photograph, you can see a white house to the mid-right of the screen, just in the middle of the photograph, just to the right. That white room, that's Abdu'l-Baha's room that was on top of that house. Anyway, the path from the Pilgrim House went in front of that house, and then between the house and the shrine. It was quite exciting to find that the answer to that question via a photograph. So once that book was once that part of the history was written, the next part was related to the role of the Guardian. The Guardian, as soon as his ministry started virtually, he began work on the mission that he knew he had to accomplish, which was to complete the shrine. And the shrine would be completed through the building of an arcade and a superstructure and a dome. But he didn't have anywhere near the resources or the helpers at that stage that could start that work. So, but the first thing he had to do was, well, the first thing he did was to work on the terraces, the gardens, and it was fascinating to see via the photographs of the Australian Effie Baker, who took photographs in later years of that early work, and also to find out how he built the extra 3 rooms at the back of the shrine that was important to make the foundation for the superstructure that would be coming in later years. This photograph here, you can see a picture of Shoghi Effendi when he was just before his ministry started. But the one on the right was a fantastic find. You can see the master entering the Pilgrim House, and on the right with his back to us is Shoghi Effendi. It's a very rare. I think I've only seen 2 photographs of the master and Shoghi Effendi at the shrine, or one photograph of the master and Shoghi Effendi at the shrine, and here the 2 are together at the Pilgrim House. This it was a struggle to find a colour photograph of the dome at the opening of the shrine, and the completion of the superstructure in 1953. But this one, you can see now the shining gold tiles in 1953. So that's the best photograph I found in the colour. A lot of the work in this is photographic research, and this is one of the finds that was to find the glowing nature of the shrine that we all read about. This was a photograph published in the Bahá'í World publication, which gives some indication of the beautiful golden dome, but not perhaps as much as the other one. And the research required a look at how the Queen Maria of Romania, pictured on the left here, on the right is of course the hand of the cause Martha Root, how she came, what happened, why she didn't actually visit the shrine, which is outlined by Della Marcus in her wonderful book on Queen Maria of Romania and her connection to the shrine. And so that's one part of the research that I was able to include in the book as Shoghi Effendi proceeded with his work to fulfill Abdu'l-Bahá's mission that was given to him by Abdu'l-Bahá to complete the shrine. And of course, part of that came through the meeting of Shoghi Effendi with the Maxwell family. You can see a picture in the middle here of Ruhia Khanum when she was a teenager. And you can see a picture on the left of the architect of the superstructure, arcade, superstructure and dome, hand of the cause, Sutherland Maxwell. And on the right, you can see the wonderful Baha'i teacher, his wife, May Maxwell, and Ruhia Khanum. So to find out how Mr. Maxwell became the architect was quite interesting. He initially was encouraged to do earlier designs. One of the books that had always intrigued me was the book by hand of the course Ugo Giacchieri, who wrote the book Shoghi Effendi, but really it's a story of his experiences with the project to build the superstructure and dome. And that was a good foundation for further research into actually what happened. There's some amazing descriptions of what in 1944, 100 years after the declaration of the Bab, of how the Guardian prepared the shrine for this for the pilgrims and visitors to enter the shrine on that night. and what it looked like. Ruhia Khanum did a fantastic job of describing that. She's a great literary figure in our faith, and her descriptions of the flowers, of how Shoghi Effendi painstakingly beautified the interior of the shrine. It was a wonderful thing to include in my book. This is the remarkable drawing that guardian of his conception of the superstructure, the arcade here, and the octagon above it, the drum, and the golden dome. You can see that from his Beaux Arts background, which involves architecture as art, he produced this wonderful picture that and presented it to the beloved guardian. And here are some descriptions of the actual superstructure. You can see, for instance, the finial at the top, the lantern. These are all sorts of things that as a non-architect and builder I had to learn. The brim, the lancet windows, the balustrade, the octagon, the types of arches and the columns. It's, as you probably already know, it's a mixture of Eastern and Western architecture, and the great beauty of it is that, like an orchestral piece, there is a theme, and the theme repeats itself from the arcade to the octagon, to the drum, and to the dome itself. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, and it repays looking at it carefully with the descriptions of the design. And as you know, there are various doors. You know the doors to the shrine, and I should point out that Abdul Bahas, in emphasising the sacredness of the shrine, something that we cannot forget, he said the very dust of the shrine, of the precincts of the shrine, inspired him to name the various doors of the shrine. This is just an indication of the sacredness of the shrine, and we know from the priceless pearl that the guardian saw the shrine of the Babu as a generator, as the centre of the administrative system of our faith. It's something mystical. It's something important, and we will all learn more about it the more we study and meditate upon it, I'm sure. This is the amazing construction process, and I think that members of the North American Baha'i community could justly feel proud in their forebears for the sacrifice that they made after the Second World War, when money wasn't that readily available. Their sacrificial donations, a lot of the other funds were put on hold. And I read the letters from the Guardian to the friends in the United States and Canada to sacrifice and to devote their funds to enable the superstructure to be built. And the way that Shoghi Effendi looked to the west, to Italy, to have the marble and the granite located and then cut and then boxed and moved over, and this prefabricated building to be erected is an amazing story that is told not only in Ugo Giaccheri's book, but by Mr. Weed and others who worked on the project. I found that very exciting to read and very inspiring to research. This is quite a biblical, you could say, photograph of the Israeli workers working on the part of the shrine there. And such was the beauty of it that many of the local residents of Haifa thought it was completed when the octagon was, even before the octagon. They thought it was complete before the octagon was built. Then the octagon was built, and then they could see the drum. You can see the drum that holds the dome. Oh, there we are. The Pilgrim House, the path to the shrine that we go now with that family going there. At that stage, only the octagon was complete. Hand of the course, Mr. It was the project manager of the drum and the dome standing in front of the door to the shrine, to the octagon, which we can see to this day. He was his remarkable service is something that no doubt the American Baha'i community feels proud of. he tells the story too of, well, I'll just go back one. In the book, it tells the story of the man who built the actual dome, the stonemason who was from Acre. The man with the golden touch, he was called by Mr. Iowis. And the story about how he was found, how he was commissioned, and what he did is something that I was really pleased to discover with the help of my research associate, Mr. Izzadinia, and to describe it. There was one great story about how after he had helped working on the archives, International Archives building, which happened after the shrine was complete, he was given a carpet, beautiful carpet, as a present, and he was carrying it down to get his shrewd back to his home in Acre when the police apprehended him and thought that he had, who was this person with his valuable carpet? They took him to the police station and he had to phone Mr. Iowis to get him released. Mr. Iowis drove down, assured the police that it was perfectly okay, and able to bring the carpet to the house of the stonemason in Acre, and his family justifiably proud of his role in building the dome that he often referred to as the Dome of Vas Effendi, because of the great respect that the master was held in Acre itself. This is a photograph from the archives of Mr. Iowis, of the master. It was exciting to see this photograph and to be able to use it in the book. You can see Mr. Iowis behind him and a British Baha'i behind him, but there's the guardian at a funeral just before his own passing. The guardian, of course, was a very dignified and person, and I think some elements of that can be shown in photographs, but of course nothing can capture his essence. The book, after the describing the completion of the shrine and the tributes paid to the hands of the cause, moves on to the passing of the guardian himself. This is a very moving photograph, isn't it? You can see Ruhia Khanum second from the left, and others. The photographs of the funeral somehow seem to capture the grief of that terrible day in November 1957 when the guardian passed away. The Coronation on Carmel, that book concludes just before or just at the inauguration of the first Universal House of Justice, which is the members of whom are seen in this photograph. And you will see to the right there Mr. Ali Nachavani, who a great hero of the faith, of course, and who received such a wonderful tribute from the Universal House of Justice. He was also a very helpful person for my books. He was most remarkable in his loving correspondence and his immediate replies to questions about the shrine. It was an example. It was a great example to me of a true Baha'i attitude. Let's move on to the next part of the history of the shrine, and we are now moving on to the subject of my third book, which is called Sacred Stairway, and it covers mainly it covers of course, the project to build the terraces of the shrine, the embellishment that the master had spoken of, the terraces that lead from the base of Mount Carmel to the top. The questions I had, of course, was why the Universal House of Justice chose that time in particular to do what they did, and the messages and the book explains at the time that there were questions by the Haifa authorities as to what was happening to all this vacant land. When would it be used? Because this was a developing city. Would it ever be used? The book explains the initial look at the mountain and then the commissioning, or of course the building of the seat of the Universal House of Justice, and then the commissioning of Mr. Faribur Sabah, the architect of the Indian House of Worship, to design the terraces of the Shrine of the Bab, and then to project manage not only their construction but the buildings on the art project, which was a massive responsibility for him. I was particularly curious as to how the inspiration came to him for the design of the terraces, and you can see in this particular photograph, which he gave to me, an initial conception, a very basic model, but I think of historic interest for those who see the beautiful terraces as we see them today. Whoops. This was also an initial model. Of course, you know, when an architect is thinking about a design, they all come up with initial iterations of the design. I was particularly interested to ask Mr. Sabah when I visited him about the spiritual inspiration, and he was kind enough to share some of his some of the quotes from the Bab himself and from the Bible, and from, of course, the Baha'i writings about and from Shoghi Effendi about the circles, you know, concentric circles. And it was interesting for me to hear Stephen Phelps in his talk talking about the Bab's writings, you know, with the Bab calling upon buildings to be made to the utmost level of perfection possible. And Mr. Sabah referred to that particular excerpt from the Bab's writings himself, which encouraged him. And of course, we all know that the Bab was denied a lamp when he was imprisoned in Marku, and that was one of the inspirations for the design that Mr. Sabah presented to the Universal House of Justice, and which was accepted. The chapter, though, I think is in much more detail than I can tell you now, but I'll just point you to it because I think it's a very inspiring chapter. The task in writing this one was to separate the elements of the construction project out. So I did that by focusing on the upper terraces, the lower terraces, and separately in the garden, so that readers can read it hopefully in a very not all tangled up, but more in a clearly understandable way, how this decade-long project was undertaken. It's quite dramatic, and there were incidents that make it quite lively. This is Mr. Sabah on the right, of course, and Steve Drake, a New Zealander from the same country as I come from originally, so I'd like to have him in my photographs. But he was his deputy. He was Mr. Sabah's deputy during this project. Now, one of the big tasks of the Terraces project was how to get the terraces to go from the base of the mountain right up to the top without some interruption at Hatzinut, which is a very busy street behind the shrine. Mr. Sabah, in negotiations with the Haifa City Council, obtained an agreement that so the Baha'is would lower that Hatzinut Avenue and build a bridge across it, which had the advantage not only for building the terraces, but also for the city itself, because prior to that there was a bump there and it was quite dangerous for traffic. By lowering it, it removed that obstacle, and we now have a much safer Hatzinut Avenue and the bridge over the terraces, which enabled the terraces to go right up. But that was a huge project, and it took some working out to find out how it was done. And anybody who goes there, please have a look underneath the bridge where you'll see the Haikal. You can see that was referred to in Professor Lawson's talk on this same program. You can see a representation of that under the bridge, which Mr. Sabah kindly told me about. The book the narrative of that book really concludes with the inauguration ceremony, which was a magnificent event that we all watched, all of us who were able to watch worldwide in various places. I remember when I was in Australia, it was an evening, and we all gathered in one big venue and watched it on screens, and that was happening all around the world at the time. But it was a wonderful ceremony with music and an address and the lights, with a big amphitheatre at the bottom of the terraces, an amazing event in the history of the Baha'i faith. And the book concludes with just a little bit about what happened afterwards. But we do have, there are annexes where, the first one is some descriptions of a few people, of about 12 people who worked on the project and who described their experiences. As a sample, I couldn't interview everybody who worked on the project. There were so many Baha'i volunteers, staff that wouldn't be impossible, but this is a representative sample, and I think it conveys what it was like to work on that project in the 1990s. And then, of course, as we all know, that from 2005 to 2011, the refurbishment project of the shrine was undertaken. And then on that day in April 2011, the covers were taken off and we saw the golden tiles of the shrine, of the dome, revealed for us. Now, the books, of course, are available at the US, from the US Baha'i bookstore. You can read all this for yourself and in a much more detail. And I do urge you not only to read the narrative, but as I said before, to please read the notes, and also you can check out the bibliography in each book. Now, Robert, I'm sure, has some questions that he has gathered that I'm prepared to answer if you're ready now, Robert.
I will take a look right now and check, and we encourage everyone to ask some questions. There is a chat feature and a question and answer feature in Zoom, and we can use both of them. I don't see anything just yet, but one of the questions that I had was that you showed this procession on its way up to the Shrine of the Bab, and you didn't make it very clear whether this was the procession in 1909 of people participating in the laying of the remains of the Bab there, or whether it was the funeral of Abdu'l-Baha. So I was a little confused about that.
Oh, yes. No, that was yes. You could have. I could have confused people about that. That was the funeral of the master himself. That picture was mourners. There were said to be some 10,000 mourners at the time in Haifa, but that was a photograph taken of the last part of the procession that went up from Hapassin Street. And one of the queries I had from Mr. Nachavani was, which particular route did they go? Did they go straight up and then turn it? Because there was a school up there. In the book, it talks about people, students at the school looking at the procession, but Mr. Nachavani, because he had been, he grew up in Haifa, he knew that it wouldn't have gone up that particular street, but turned left before it and went up Hatzianut. And the value of that photograph for me as a researcher was to show where they turned into the property. They turned into the property in Hatzianut and turned right. And then they went down towards the Pilgrim House, turned left, and went between the house and the shrine where the speeches, those wonderful speeches at the master's funeral, were delivered.
And the house of Abbas Ghuli then was between the current, the former Pilgrim House that was the Pilgrim House until 20 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Between there and the Shrine of the Bab, which today is just, of course, garden and terrace. So that's where the house of Abbas.
Yes, it was much. Oh, yes, that's right, Robert. It was much closer, though, to the shrine than it was to the Pilgrim House. It was only, maybe, I'm not sure what they say in the book, probably about 25 metres or so to the east of the shrine. And that, as I mentioned before, that was a puzzle to me because we don't often see much reference to that house because it was pulled down in the 1930s and gardens were placed in that area. But yes, that was the house. And so when you read about Abdu'l-Baha going to the shrine and spending the evening there, he was referring to, it refers to the master going to that house and then going up to his room on the roof, that little white room that we saw in that photograph.
In the procession picture, yeah.
Yeah, the procession were mourners led by, it's described in the book, I think there were Boy Scouts and others that led and other mourners that led the procession up to the shrine.
Now, the interment of the remains of the Bab, how far below the floor was it? What did they dig essentially a basement space and then put the marble sarcophagus there? How did they do that?
Yeah, this was a honestly, you know, at times when I was researching this area, I thought, oh, this is just too hard. You know, I can't resolve this. But after a long period of discussion and investigation and looking at the sources, I found out what happened. I thought perhaps at the start that maybe the entrance, you know, the shrine, the mausoleum was built with vaults underneath, so it was all, the vaults were already built there. Oh. So, you know, there's the ground floor that we go into when we pray, when we go into the shrine, but underneath that there are vaults, and these are quite extensive vaults. There's one directly under the middle part of the room where we go in to say our prayers at the part there. There's a vault directly underneath, and that is where the sarcophagus of the Shrine of the Bab is. And so I had to figure out how they got, A, the sarcophagus into the vault, and B, of course, what happened at the time of the interment. So what happened was in the rear room, which is now the rear, it can get quite confusing, but the rear eastern room, there was a entrance to the
vault.
The vault, yeah. So you could, wooden steps were, well, it's actually not the one that we know now, because the you know, the rooms that were added on by the Guardian, it's the prayer room to the Shrine of the Bab, but on the eastern side.
The middle right.
It's hard to describe. Middle right. That's it. Yeah.
The middle right room.
Geometry isn't my strength, and this is one of the struggles I had. So, but anyway, yes, that's right. It's the middle. It's the middle right. So that's where the ladder went down. So when the sarcophagus was hauled up separately from the sacred remains, they hauled it up. I described this in the book. They hauled it up, and then they had to take it down those stairs and through a door into the vault, and it was placed there. The sacred remains had been hidden in a house in Haifa for about 9 years, unlike the story I initially heard that they were stored at the house of Abdullah Pasha for all that time. No, they were only there for about a year, and then they were transferred to a house that the master rented in Haifa. And then on just shortly before the interment day, they were taken up to the shrine, and they were actually taken out. Where they were stored, we don't have definite evidence, but I think just by sheer deduction, the safest place for them to remain before they were placed in the sarcophagus would have been in the vault themselves. The description of the interment involves the master coming up to that entrance on the eastern side, the middle, which is now the middle, and then this is where he took his turban off, and he took his cloak off and his shoes, and then he walked down the ladder to the entrance to the vault and went in there, and that is where the wonderful description that Shoghi Effendi has included in God Passes By took place. He picked up the box, he placed it in the teak coffin that was installed in the sarcophagus. He placed his head on the side and wept and wept and wept, and now we can understand why. The immense responsibility, the amazing responsibility, everything going against him really, in the physical world of being a prisoner, of being so many difficulties, buying the land, getting the sacred remains over there. That last was off his, this great load, this great responsibility was off his shoulders. He had achieved what Baha'u'llah said on that great day. And it was interesting for me to find out who was there, as I mentioned earlier, about who was watching this event. Some were, of course, the vault wasn't big enough for everybody to go in, so there's only a certain number of people who could be in the vault itself. Some stood on the stairs and some were up at the top as well. Now, of course, you'd want to know where the sacred remains of Abdul Baha are, because they will no doubt be removed at the time for their interment in the new shrine of Abdul Baha. That's the next question. Yeah, a question for me too. Yes, right. Well, the shrine, the remains of Abdul Baha are not actually directly in front of the sarcophagus of the Bab, but just over to the east. rear of the front room there, the east rear of the front room. It's directly underneath. That's where the coffin of the master is, and no doubt at the time of the which is the reinterment, which we are hopefully all going to be alive and being able to hear about, or some of us perhaps witness. No doubt the sacred remains will be disinterred and conveyed to the new shrine that is underway at the moment.
So as I understand it, when you go to the Shrine of the Bab, currently the front three rooms towards the bottom of the mountain, by front, that's what I mean, those are the rooms that refer to Abdu'l-Baha, with the central room of those three being the interment room, even though he's not there, and then the rooms to the east and west of that room being the rooms you pray in. Then behind those three, top of the mountain, are three rooms that are for the Bab, with the central room being where he's interred, and the two to the east and west being the prayer room.
That's very well described. I wish I had you around at the time when I put it in my book.
But Abdu'l-Baha is not actually in that, underneath the floor of that middle room in the front. He's actually behind.
Oh yes, no. He's in the front of the. He's under the floor of the middle room, but just not right in the centre of it. Because if he was right in the centre of it, he would be in front of the sarcophagus of the Bab, which is not appropriate. He's just to the side and just to the side. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Because I was thinking in terms of exactly that, a sort of, shall we call it, spiritual protocol.
Yeah, spiritual protocol. Yes, that's right.
How very interesting.
Yes.
Well, we have a few questions here. Mary asks, was the greatest holy leaf present at the interment of the sacred remains of the Bab?
That's a very good question, Mary, and I inquired from Bahá'í Ma'ani, who is an expert, of course, on her wonderful book about the women associated with the revelation. And I asked Bahá'í about whether she thought that the greatest holy leaf was there, and it's not absolutely certain. You could say that she may have been in the house of, because in those days women were often, especially not so much the Western women, but the Eastern women were kept separate from the men. And so the question was she actually present at the either in or near the shrine? It's not quite certain, but I'm sure that she was there in the vicinity. Exactly where, we're not sure. She could have been right in the house of Abbas Cooley watching, or she may have been elsewhere, but it's not quite certain.
And that reminds me of another question.
There's something in the book, by the way. There's something in the book that addresses that question.
Good. I've got two other questions from people, but I'm sure we'll get more. But I have another question also. It seems to me in God Passes By, Rahil Khanum writes that when they were building the Shrine of the Bab, there was some concern about whether the caissons or the supports that they had to put in would disturb the sarcophagus of the Bab.
Yes.
So I guess that means they had to do a certain amount of construction down in the vault to support that superstructure. And they must have known exactly where the sarcophagus was, because they can go down and look. Well, maybe they couldn't have easily gone down and looked because they had closed up that entranceway too. I don't know.
They certainly didn't go down and have a look. They knew where it was in the middle, but those supports that went down, as described in the book, they were concerned about that. And you're right, then there's a very dramatic passage in The Priceless Pearl about how the concern that the sarcophagus wasn't disturbed at all. And I think part of the value of that particular passage in the book is emphasizing the Guardian's understanding of the sacredness of the shrine. And Ruhia Khanum brilliantly conveys that in her book. And I think it's a lesson to all of us as to the sacredness of the shrine. But yes, at the time, but even in the restoration program, nobody entered the vaults of either the Bab or Abdul-Baha during the restoration of the shrine, when quite considerable work was done to strengthen it. When it happens that the Master's sacred remains are disinterred, then that will be the first time since they were interred in 1921 that they would have been seen, or that the coffin will have been seen.
And I wonder whether at that point the front 3 rooms of the Shrine of the Bab will be converted into additional prayer spaces. In other words, they could open they could open a door into that central space from the front central one, for example.
Yes, that's what I would imagine. I haven't seen anything written about it from the Universal House of Justice, who will make their decision, no doubt. But I would expect that to happen, as happened at the rear of the shrine just recently, at the time of the restoration, that those rear rooms were opened up, and now we can enter those rooms to say prayers. Then hopefully that will, I'm sure. I'm confident that it will happen. Not sure, confident.
I haven't been. Last time I was there was 2010, and the shrine was still covered up, so I didn't know that. That's very interesting. Bob asks this very interesting question.
Well, I've been there.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Go on.
Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just going to say that when I was writing the books, I'd served at the shrine until 2006, but I hadn't seen the restoration until just at the bicentenary celebrations recently, which I was very pleased to be. I was on the waiting list to attend, and fortunately somebody cancelled, and so my wife Chris and I were able to attend the bicentenary celebrations of the birth of in Haifa, and so that was my chance to have a look at the beautiful, exquisite work that the restoration people did on the shrine and rooms. And not only that, but the gilding of the pinnacles. It's for those who haven't seen the restored shrine, I really urge you to go and have a look at it. It was a remarkable achievement.
So Bob asks, how has the number of pilgrims visiting the shrine grown over the years, and are they still able to pray inside the shrine?
Yes, well, that's a good question, because as the faith grew, of course, there was a big surge in numbers in the 1960s and 1970s in particular, and there was some talk about how in the future there'll be so many that we wouldn't be able to perhaps enter the prayer rooms. And then, of course, in the 1980s, when it was more difficult, became impossible for many of the Persian friends to visit the shrines, the places opened up for people from other countries, pilgrims from other countries to attend. Hopefully that situation will be reversed and that the Christian friends can come in big numbers as well. So I guess that's when the question will come about as to arrangements for pilgrims being able to enter the prayer rooms. At the moment, there seems to be no problem at all about. Of course, the pilgrim groups have expanded over time as more and more people have embraced the faith, and no doubt there will become more and more in the future. And then it'll be up to the Universal House of Justice to make the decisions about when and where we can enter the prayer rooms.
Yeah, it seems to me when I first went on pilgrimage in '88, there were like 80 people at a time or something like that, 4 buses, or 3 buses. And then when I was there again in '96, it had increased maybe 50%. And then when I was there in 2010, it maybe doubled. So maybe 200 or 300 people at a time. I don't know exactly, because they had replaced the Pilgrim House with a new Pilgrim House, and then they had to replace that one as well, as I understand it. So there's like a succession of Pilgrim Houses, first one farther to the east, and now I guess the new one is farther to the west, though I haven't seen it. So
the new Pilgrim Reception Centre, yes, it's to the west. It's a beautiful building that caters for the needs of the expanding number of pilgrims, and it's a great place to rest, to visit, to talk with other pilgrims, get refreshments and things like that. And The Pilgrim House that was opened by the master himself is still available to visit, and I would urge everybody to go to that special place. It's wonderful, and it has a lot of memories. I mean, the master himself sat in it. The guardian himself was there. Members of the House of Justice used to give talks there, as you probably experienced, and so now we have the choice of both buildings, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
For pilgrims.
Another question we have is, can you give any kind of description of the box that contained the sacred remains?
Well, we know that, of course, over a period of time, like all human remains are not substantial enough for a big coffin. Time the sacred remains were transferred, they were in a there were 3 boxes in all: the interior one, an exterior one, and a middle one, and an exterior one. My understanding of it is that they were not the length of a coffin as we would imagine it, but more, I'm not sure the proportion. You could say half the size or a quarter of the size. But what we do know about that is that the exterior ones, when the master was asked about whether they should, because of course he took the interior one out when he placed it in the sarcophagus. What he did was he arranged for the exterior boxes to be destroyed, so that he was very keen that people wouldn't sort of say this is a relic. We've got some sort of piece of wood that came from the boxes that surrounded the original coffin of the Barber, and so it's quite clear that he had that problem resolved by having those the exterior destroyed. There is some description of the box in Beirut, which seems to be slightly an error, but it was a bit described as a bit bigger than I'm sure it was, but the exact there's no photograph, but I think it's quite clear that it's not a huge container, put it that way.
Interesting. There was another question I had related. The sarcophagus, the marble sarcophagus, what can you tell us about that?
Well, this is in that chapter 8 that I was talking. Oh no, the next chapter talks about the sarcophagus and its role in its spiritual role, I guess, in the faith and in relation to sacred writings of the manifestations of God. But it was commissioned by the master to be built in Myanmar. It was called Burma in those days, Myanmar now, and it was made of the finest marble or alabaster, you could say, and it was a very expensive. It was very expensive to build it, but we had affluent Baha'i pioneers there, and also local people who contributed to that construction. It had Mishkin Kalam, the great calligrapher. He inscribed the greatest name on the side of the sarcophagus, and there are also inscriptions on the top, which are not quite sure whether that was the greatest name or another of his calligraphies. Anyway, that was shipped from Burma to Haifa. The description of the arrival is recorded in the book, but and there's a photograph in the book of the packing cases that it came in. And one thing that people would be interested in was that not only was the marble sarcophagus built, but also teak coffins were also built and transported to Haifa. So there's a teak coffin in the sarcophagus that was commissioned also by the master. it's a beautiful, by the way, the picture on the book, you can, if you look carefully, you can see some of the beauty of its decoration.
And Ayla asks, do we have a tentative date for the completion of the Master's Shrine? It's something you and I already talked about.
Well, I haven't, when I was in Haifa, of course, I was curious about it. I didn't ask anybody with any authority, and nobody like me, nobody knew anything about it. I mean, this is for the Universal House of Justice, no doubt, to let us know in the future. I know that, for instance, with the building of the terraces, Mr. Sabah was not given a definite date by which he had to finish it by, but he set his own deadline and achieved it, which was, as you know, by the year 2000. And so I think that the House of Justice is a very practical body, and they will make the decision based on when the shrine is ready. This is my understanding based on how it's the practicality of that supreme body manifests itself in action. I'm sure that will be when the shrine is ready. That's when it will happen.
Yeah, it's difficult to imagine it could be ready in a year and a half when the passing of the Master at this point is just slightly less than a year away, the 100th anniversary of it, actually, because he passed.
That's right.
In November of 1920.
Well, not this coming November, but the next one. So it's really 2 years. But whether or not they can do it, I don't know. Whatever happens, let's hope we're all around to see it.
Yeah, you're right.
Because it's a wonderful design by Mr. Amanat.
It's amazing. Yeah,
Mr. Amanat, of course. Of course, Mr. Amanat and Mr. Sabo are long-time friends and associates, and I was privileged to hear them discussing in a discussion with each other, and the respect that they showed each other was remarkable. As you know, that Mr. Sabo was the project manager for the buildings designed by Mr. Amanat on the Ark, and now Mr. Amanat is building has designed the Shrine of the Master. So to me, when I first saw that design, I thought, wow, this is an astounding design. I can't wait to be able to visit it in the future.
Here's another question that just occurred to me. Do we know whether there were any other designs proposed for the Shrine of the Bab?
Yes, there was. Mason Remy, who was a leading Baha'i at the time, but he subsequently became a covenant breaker in the 1960s. But when he was active in the faith in the 1920s, he produced a design for the Shoghi Effendi, which was shelved, and it's a very you can see that there's if you go into Masray, the mansion of Masray, which is that beautiful, that lovely place that you go to on pilgrimage, where Baha'u'llah was so happy. But if you go there, on the wall, you can see a drawing of that particular design. It was more, I would think, you could say more Islamic in feel, perhaps. But anyway, that design was shelved, and so it's only of historic interest. He also designed a set of terraces from the base of Mount Carmel to the top, and that's in the book as well. You can see it, and those also were not used. There was an intention in the time of the Master for the city engineer who proposed a stairway to the shrine, and we have not seen any outcome of that proposal on any design or anything like that. So we haven't located anything like that. So I presume that wasn't drawn. So the one Mason Remy was drawn. He also drew some terraces, and of course Mr. Maxwell, you can see it in Coronation on Carmel. He did some drawings of terraces and entranceways for the Guardian that you can see for yourself. But of course, terraces themselves, as they are now, were designed by Mr. Sabah, and the others were not proceeded with. But yes, so that's the complicated answer to that question.
Thanks. I don't see any other questions right offhand. Oh, and one person has made a comment just this instant. If I can get this. The current Pilgrim House is referred to as the Pilgrim Reception Center and is a beautifully renovated old 3-story school completed about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the newest.
That's
Pilgrim
right.
House.
Yeah, that's right. It used to be, when I was serving in Haifa, it was a school, and I was thinking, oh, wouldn't that be good to have on the Baha'i property? And after a period of time, it became, the Bahá'í World Centre acquired that property, and it is, that person is right, it's a beautiful 3-story building that serves its purpose admirably.
Very good. I don't.
You can approach the shrine from the back. You don't have to go back out a road and then turn right onto the sort of the northern pathway that leads to the shrine.
I missed some of that. Maybe it broke up on my side. You're saying that from the new Pilgrim House, you can approach it from the west. From the west. Yeah,
from the west. Yeah, you don't have to go up to the road and go along and then go into the entranceway. You can go just next to that building. You can go down a sort of a roadway and then turn right into a path that leads you straight across to the shrine, and that's how you can get there now.
Very good.
Yeah.
I don't know whether.
If anybody has any questions, they can email me too. It's michaelvday@gmail.com. I'm happy to take any email questions. If some questions came after the conclusion of this presentation.
Annette has another question. She said, please describe more about the star under the bridge over Hatzianut.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, you can have a look. Do you know that 5-pointed star that makes up the Haikal? Then Mr. Sabah has used a brilliant architectural method to make let's just say the underside of the bridge look. He described it to me patiently several times, and as I said, architecture and geometry need to be patiently explained to me. But it enables that so that the bridge and the underside of the bridge look, directly leading up to the summit of the mountain. But the 5-pointed star, of course, is the symbol of the Bab that Professor Lawson, I think, referred to in one of his addresses to this very this kind of presentation earlier this year. And but it's quite exciting, really, isn't it, that when people drive under the bridge on this busy road, they're actually driving under a symbol of the Bab.
Yeah.
You can see it. It's big concrete beams. I'm not sure whether there's a photo. Yes, I think there's a photograph in Sacred Stairway of that particular. Yes, there is. There's a photograph in the book of that design. And if you go there, make sure that you go walk along Hatzianut and look up under the bridge, and you'll see it.
Huh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll have to now I have to go schedule another pilgrimage in order to see all of these things.
Yeah, it's amazing once you know more about it. Like me, I mean, I discovered, when I was sort of like learning this stuff for myself, I think, I can't wait to see it again, because each piece of information makes you want to have a look at that and to become closer and closer to this amazing institution, the Shrine of the Bab.
Absolutely. Well, Kay says, many thanks to a presentation full of new information. Love your books. A wonderful contribution. And I think that summarizes it quite well, actually.
That's very kind.
Michael, we really are very, very grateful for this hour and a half with you, discussing the development of the Shrine of the Bab, the movement of the remains of the Bab all the way from Tabriz, ultimately to the Queen of Carmel, to the building of the Queen of Carmel there on Mount Carmel. And I'm sure we'll have to have you back at some point Perhaps you'll do one on the Shrine of Abdu'l-Baha in a few years, and we'll be able to
That would
talk
be
about
nice.
that as well. Yes. So thank you so much. And again, I want to thank our audience for attending today and wish them the very best. And we look forward to seeing them again